Former Michigan Governor Jim Blanchard is in the queue talking the presidential race in Michigan, which is brand new. That's our lead story, along with the results of the primary election. And here to discuss all that and more, Chuck Stokes, Jordan Hermany, and Lauren Gibbons. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Another busy news week as we report to you from Studio C. So what was the lead out of the election on Tuesday, other than the fact that everybody was playing golf rather than voting?
Yeah, I mean, it was not the most surprising election in the world. We got the confirmation on the Rogers-Slotkin race. We saw, some interesting congressional primaries, and also at the state house level, we did see some incumbents get bumped. Neil Frisky, I think, was an interesting development. He had some controversies, had an arrest, and got primaried out by voters. So while it wasn't, like a huge turnout necessarily, there were a few interesting developments.
What did you make of it?
Well, that was kind of what I heard from voters when I went to the polls to talk to them, was that, well, I kind of came out because it was my civic duty, but nothing necessarily is motivating me right now. And coupled with how bad the weather was, it's no real surprise that turnout was low Tuesday. Like Lauren said, I think the real intrigue was down at the state level with respect to state races, because other than that, everybody who was pretty much forecasted to win won. So it was a kind of sleepy primary, but I mean, hold on, because it's definitely going to be a rather rambunctious November.
It'll be completely different in November.
Yeah, I agree with everything my colleagues have said. No real surprises by virtue of the fact that both Rogers and Slotkin had their attack ads already, and the very next day they were already pre-produced in the stations, ready to go. So
usually
their polling, internal polling, was obviously pretty darn good.
I was shocked by, because usually there's a let's take a deep breath before we start spending money, and I was watching the news last night, and they were back-to-back ads.
They're right there. And then on our side of the state, the congressional race, that will have the rematch between John James and Carl Marlinga. That should be great, because Marlinga only lost by 1,600 votes, or flip it the other way, John James only won by 1,600 votes. So this is going to be an expensive race, a real humdinger of a race.
I don't think there's House control. Did we learn anything there as to how that's going to go?
I mean, not to my knowledge. Pretty much it looks like, again, everybody who was more or less slated to win won. We did see some incumbents get bumped out in Republican areas, but they are also Republican areas, so it's very likely they're just going to be replaced by another Republican.
And those had some local issues, right? They weren't necessarily like a sign of statewide trends. I think regardless of what happened on Tuesday, it's still going to be a very competitive general election. It's kind of hard to say from the primary, like whether someone comes out with an edge.
Well, the Democrats are absolutely more geeked now than they were prior to the election with this new ticket. Am I right or not?
No question about it. If you just listen to all the talk radio, that's all the talk right now. They feel the word they're using is joy in the campaign, and they feel as though they haven't felt this type of excitement since 2008 when Barack Obama was running. And it has energized, when you just look at the head-to-head picture and you have former President Trump on, now the old guy in the race, and you have Vice President Harris, the young, energized person, and with her running ticket, everything has just sort of flip-flopped, and so it's going to be interesting. Now, she's peaked, right? Well, I shouldn't say she's peaked. She's gotten a great bump. There's a lot of excitement. She'll get another bump with the convention, but when you really want to peak is October, so there's a long way to go.
So you were in the middle of all this in an airplane hangar of all places.
Yes.
Lucky you.
Yeah, no, it was deafeningly loud. All throughout the event, there were people there who were so excited to vote. I mean, I met kids who weren't even able to vote who were at the event just because they were interested in being a part of it. I heard the word historic tossed around a lot. Joy, again, like you pointed out, they repeated it on the stage. I heard it from the people I talked to, but there was also a sense of and it broke out as a chant several times during the rally of "we're not going back." So it is a little bit of the enthusiasm that we saw during the Obama administration, but I'd like to point out that a lot of that was genuine enthusiasm for Harris.
How can you tell?
Well, so because in my view, for Harris, yes, there is enthusiasm. I'm not trying to downplay that, but there is also another sense of we're not going back. We can't elect Donald Trump again. So that fire of we can't have him again in office is still there. That hasn't gone away, which I think is the key difference between comparing this to the 2008 race and now, is that while there is enthusiasm behind Kamala, that's something that came about just because we kind of got Biden off the ticket and we're having a younger person, two younger people. I do feel it's important to note Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are similar in age. I did hear that from several people. That
60 and 59, isn't
yeah.
it?
I think so.
He's very close in age to her, but I have heard that from several people of, well, we put another old guy on the ticket. No,
he just looks young. He's from Minnesota. They have rougher winters than we do.
And I think that's interesting because I attended the Biden rally shortly before he decided he was going to be out of the race, and you had voters there. I'm here to see if he can still do it. I'm here to protest because I think he should get out of the race. I'm here because I like him and hopefully he makes it. It was just a very different vibe from what we saw with the Harris rally in Detroit, where, there's not all this uncertainty anymore, especially after the debate. You saw a lot of despondency among Democrats, just people who were really concerned that he wasn't going to be able to beat Trump again. And I think now there's been this at least temporary injection of hope. We'll see how the debates go. We'll see if Trump can get back into the the national conversation after things die down. But it's been a really, really significant shift.
What was also interesting was Senator Vance basically kind of trolling the whole itinerary of the Harris-Walz campaign, and whether or not that really is going to work, because there's certain reference, you look at that and say, okay, yeah, you're trying to make sure that you're staying in the news cycle too, but why aren't you establishing your own pattern in your own rally? And it feels as though they're not leading the way they felt they were leading when Biden was in.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did she not call out the audience to knock off the lock him up, referring to Mr. Trump? Did I hear that incorrectly?
Yeah, there were several points where that chant kind of started to jump up throughout the crowd, and it was pretty much batted down with like a no, like, we're trying to be respectful here. The one big thing, though, that did get me was there was a group of protesters who did interrupt the rally several times, and they were chanting, the remarks of Kamala, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide. It's the same refrain that we heard from the Biden administration, individuals protesting the ongoing war in Gaza. They interrupted twice. She tried to say, hey, let them speak, it's a democracy. But then a third time, she did eventually interrupt the crowd and say, if you want Donald Trump to win, say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking, is verbatim what she said. And that has kind of gone viral a bit and has started to kind of tear at different people in the Democratic Party, saying, A, good for her, good for silencing that crowd. That's not this time. That's not this moment. But then there's also another sect of people saying, you did this in Michigan, of all places, where we have a very high Palestinian population, Muslim population. You did that here. You called them out publicly and kind of disparaged the fact that they're concerned about this. And now there is, again, that kind of permeation of, well, we're feeling happy, but this war is a huge thing for Democrats. There was that 100,000 vote protest vote back in February of the uncommitted people. In 2016, Trump only won the state by under 11,000 votes.
This came at a time when the door was just slightly opening to endorsing or getting on board with her. That Arab community was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if that poured cold water on it or not.
Well, so from reports that I've been seeing, members of that movement did meet with her ahead of the rally. They've tried to speak with her with respect to brokering an arms embargo with Israel and also calling for an immediate ceasefire. Obviously, the mechanisms that move global politics are huge and vast and large, so one conversation is not necessarily going to move the tide on that. But for what it's worth, she did speak with those protesters, and then they also did interrupt her rally, and then she also did call them out publicly. So where this lands, especially in a couple of weeks as the media cycle moves, I'm honestly unsure, but it is something that's going to continue to follow this campaign.
Well, while this campaign has problems with that voting bloc, they met with the UAW. They were in here for 2 days in a row, which is, I can't remember the last time we've had that. I would love to know what party they had overnight with the governor. I'd like to know which bar they went to.
Yeah, well, that's a big endorsement, and Harris is going to ride that as long as she can. That's a lot of workers, a lot of volunteers out there. It's the leadership of the UAW.
But can they bring the Trump UAW workers back?
Oh,
That's
I don't
the
know.
question.
There'll be some. I don't think it'll be the lion's share, because you've got the president of the UAW who, he's the president and he's leading the majority of the troops. There is certainly a faction of the UAW that is solidly Donald Trump. And they're going to be with him down the line. You saw some of their signs out there, even though Fain said, this is our person and this is who we're going to get behind. So there's a little internal battle in there, but I would think the lion's share is going to go with the leadership of the party.
I wondered if they talked about how to handle this EV issue, because that is a ticking time bomb out there. And I've not heard her address is she going to endorse the Biden policy, 50% of the fleet by year 2030? My guess is she walks that back.
And I think that's also a valid point, because a lot of those arguments that are coming, at least in Michigan, are saying, this is from California. This is the California policy. She is from California. That's a different angle, a different aspect of this that she does need to consider when she's trying to reach out to constituencies in the Midwest. And I do think that maybe that's not going to play as well here as it may play in places like California.
All right. How does it play when Mr. Vance comes in and says she's not meeting with the news media?
I mean, for what it's worth, she's not. I have been at 2 now Harris rallies. I have yet to have a media availability with her or anybody that we knew of. National outlets are getting a little bit of time with her, from my understanding.
It was a 70-second scrum near the plane.
Yeah, but that's so for what it's worth, and I said this before, journalists are supposed to be the proxy of the voter. If what concerns we have in Michigan are absolutely different from the concerns they have in California, in Maine, in Florida. If you're not meeting with local journalists to address local issues, there's no real way that voters in our state can understand where you're at with that policy. Now, I have heard from other people, or seen online, I should say, people saying, well, why does it matter? She just named Walz. She just got her campaign together. Again, it matters because you're trying to speak to the voters. If you want to win over Michigan, which is a battleground state, you're going to have to talk to the press here. You're going to have to make this case to the voters, because in her remarks at the rally the other day, she said very little to Michigan specifically, other than pretty much the road to the White House runs through your state.
It was the stump speech.
It was.
And same thing for the VP.
Well, no, but Walz's speech was almost verbatim the same speech that he gave Tuesday. So
yes,
they're going to need to get new material, and part of that new material very likely should be, at least in my opinion, and obviously I'm biased, I have something to gain from this, but that should include speaking with reporters.
But do the people at home go, I could not possibly vote for this person for president because he or she won't meet with the press?
No, and because let's face it, a lot of people at home feel about our media that we're way, way, way down there on their list, and we're part of the problem. So I think that you're right that she is going to have to do it at some point, but I think she's feeling, I don't have to do it right now. I'm going to ride this surge that I'm on as much as I can. I'm going to go from city to city with my vice presidential pick. We're going to get to know people. We're going to make sure that people know us. And there's still 80 some odd days to go. She's got time to do that, and I think she will do that. I also think that all of this came about so fast that she's just, although she seems to be handling it very well and seems to have made a good pick that is matching up well with her, that there's still a lot that she has to do. You got to remember, Biden was running for this thing forever. Now all of a sudden you say, whoa, you're the top of the ticket. So there's still a lot even behind the scenes with, I'm sure, those that she's working with to say, what's our policy going to be? How are we going to roll it out? All those things. There's a lot going on.
And to Chuck's point, too, the longer that, they give the generic stump speech, the less time she has to say something controversial and maybe lose that momentum that she gained just by being not Biden. So the longer she can go without potentially angering certain subsets of voters, as we just discussed earlier. Maybe
and they're trying to
better
get
for
to the convention where they know they're going to get another bump. Now, coming out of that convention, that's when she's going to really be scrutinized.
I thought Mr. Trump had an interesting line. He said, I worked real hard to beat Joe Biden. Now I have to beat her, which sort of summed it up, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. He gave a press conference at Mar-a-Lago the other day in which he repeatedly several times referred to Vice President Harris as stupid. So it is interesting kind of seeing this back and forth of, well, I prepared for Biden, now it's unfair, to, well, she's dumb anyway, so we're probably going to beat her. I don't necessarily think the camp knows. They're gathering their resources right now. They were prepared absolutely to take on Biden. And obviously they thought that they could win, and potentially rightfully so, based off of the president's stamina. We saw that during the debate. He very clearly looked, Joe Biden very clearly looked not well during that debate. They prepared for that. So, now that they're going to have to reassess everything, and for what it's worth, their attacks aren't really working at this moment. I mean, he's tried to call her out for her laugh. That hasn't really seemed to stick. They're trying to call out Tim Walz for putting tampons in bathrooms. That doesn't seem to really be sticking. So they're kind of trying to figure out what to grasp at right now, and I don't know where they're going to land, frankly.
All right, let's call in our former governor of the state of Michigan, James Blanchard. Governor, it's good to see you again. Welcome to Off the Record once more, sir. Nice to have you on board. Before Mr. Biden made his decision, in your private moments, did you conclude that he did have to step off the ticket at some point?
Absolutely. And everyone I talked to from around the country or in Michigan agreed. And so they were incredibly relieved when he stepped down. But what surprised me is how much energy now the new ticket has. It's legitimate. I hear you talking about it. Everyone I talked to was really excited. Now, I'm over on the west side of the state this week, but I talked to a lot of people. And so it's a whole new race. And I think the really interesting thing is the Democratic ticket is two fresh faces. People are still just getting acquainted with Kamala Harris. They're seeing how much she enjoys campaigning and people and politics. Tim Walz, of course, is new to everyone. It's a very strong ticket. I think will carry Michigan. By the way, they're on a tour here, a tour of the new ticket. And so I think when that ends, there'll be plenty of availability with local press in every key state at least. I think that'll happen, and I don't think you guys should worry about that.
In your private moments, are you also worried that the bloom will come off the bud here and that things will fall apart?
Not at all. Look, I know Harris. By the way, I should disclaim, her husband has been my law partner for a number of years since she was elected to the Senate, Doug Emhoff, and I used to walk down the hall, 5 offices from me, and we would shoot the bull about politics. So I'm comforted that he's there as well. So she is whip smart. And I'll tell you, I'm glad that Trump has finally decided to debate her, because I think she will slice and dice him, the likes of which he will never understand until it's over with. So I'm looking forward to this race. I'm going to be active in it. All my friends are. I've been at this for a long time, as you know. I was elected to Congress in my primary 50 years ago, yes, and I knew what I was doing. And if I'm excited, I think that's a sign of positive things for Kamala and Tim Walz, and I think for our state.
So to that point, though, as we mentioned earlier, there was a small little protest that did break out at the rally with respect to the Israel-Palestine conflict. I guess, how concerned are you at this moment of that issue affecting Vice President Harris and her running mate Walz in Michigan, considering, as we mentioned earlier, 100,000 votes were cast in the Michigan primary to sort of signal their dissatisfaction with the way that the president is moving on that war. In 2020, Biden only won that state by 154,000 votes. 2016, Trump won it by just under 11,000. How concerning is this issue for you? For the ticket?
Well, first of all, every group is important, and I think everyone agrees. If we could get a ceasefire in the Middle East, that would be fabulous, and that may happen. You just don't know. The other thing is my experience with the community of Arab heritage is there's 5 or 6 groups, and they can be deeply divided. A number of them are not going to vote for Trump. Maybe they'll stay home. they're not going to vote for Donald Trump, period. I mean, he's kind of curtains for any minority group, and everyone should know that. I should also say that the community in Dearborn voted for George W. Bush, not John Kerry. And John Kerry still carried Michigan. So let's not get too carried away. The other thing is in the Michigan primary, there were, 120,000 uncommitted. The normal uncommitted is probably a little less than that. So a lot of it is just the normal uncommitted. It wasn't a protest vote. I want to make that clear. Now, there'll be work to be done in Dearborn, Dearborn Heights, Hamtramck, absolutely. But we're not going to get carried away with exaggerating the problems because we have a good, strong ticket. And I think if you step back, the thing that bothers me is everyone, including the Wall Street Journal editorial, tries to normalize Trump. You cannot. He not only has 3 significant personality disorders that really render him unfit to be president, but let's step back one more. We've never had a president run again for president claiming he actually won the last election and being unwilling to concede the fact that he lost. The second thing, we've never had a person running for president who tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power in our country. These are overarching issues that every person in Michigan who cares about our country needs to take into account when they go vote. It isn't just that the Harris-Biden team has done a good job. It is that the other side is from another world. And then you add to it the vice presidential candidate, Vance. And here's a guy that a few years ago said, Trump is America's Hitler. He's reprehensible. And now he's on the ticket, proud to run with him. What kind of Jekyll and Hyde is that? So we have a strong ticket. They have a very weak ticket. The Democrats, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, are representing a whole new generation. And to most voters, they're fresh faces, and they're going to be very, very effective.
So if I could just interrupt you very quickly, you talk about the Jekyll and Hyde thing. You talk about how there's this movement behind Harris and Walz. Is there any concern that we may be repeating the same mistakes as in 2016, wherein Hillary Clinton seemed very, very sure that she was going to defeat Donald Trump and then didn't and lost Michigan on top of it?
Yeah, well, I think people are cautioned. I remember that race very, very well. And I remember the Hillary Clinton people saying to me, we hope Michigan will be done by October 1st. And I remember saying, wait a minute. When Bill Clinton ran, he was in Michigan about once every 10 days. Same with Al Gore, same with John Kerry. They thought with the Obama movement, somehow Michigan was solidly Democratic. Everyone knows we're a toss-up state. This is going to be probably a 3-point race, probably a 3-point race also with Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. So I don't think anyone is going to rest comfortably until the last ballot is cast. We also have a very strong Democratic Party. I'll bet we are going to be able to bank over 2.5 million votes vote by mail before Election Day. We're all working it, and no one's going to take it for granted. Hillary only came to Michigan about once in the fall until the last weekend, and they really thought Michigan was a safe place, and it wasn't. It never will be, as far as I know. And Tim, you followed it. It's never safe.
Governor, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, and looking ahead, in addition to just showing up in Michigan, what does the Harris-Walz ticket need to do to appeal to Michigan voters and maybe bank some of those either likely Democratic or independent voters?
I think they need to talk about the future, and they will. They can talk about protecting a woman's right to choose, which Vice President Harris has led the fight on, and that's important. And that's important in Michigan, as you know, because we've had a referendum that allows women to make their own health care decisions. I think they'll talk about manufacturing. Look, the Harris-Biden record of 15 million new jobs is a big deal. We have record low unemployment in Michigan. This is fabulous. By the way, the roads are being fixed, and there's a lot of federal money there, and thanks to the leadership of Governor Whitmer, that's happening. I think you're going to hear more about an assault weapons ban, which is really important. I mean, we cannot continue to look the other way in this country when teenagers could go get assault weapons and kill little children in their schoolrooms. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Governor, I've got to let Chuck Stokes answer a question, or I'm off his Christmas list, okay? So, and we're going to stay into an overtime because we've got a lot of ground to cover. But Chuck, please.
All right. Real quickly, you know something about dealing with tough economies. We've seen recent volatility in the stock market. Jamie Dimon said he believes that a recession is coming at the end of this year or close to the end of this year. What effect do you think this may have on the economy and particularly on this race? Michiganders vote with their pocketbooks.
Yeah, I think, as you know, my original campaign was jobs, jobs, jobs. There are 3 issues. So the economy, I think we have a strong economy, and it's been a strong economy. I might add that when Joe Biden took over, it was record high unemployment, and not a single vaccination had occurred with COVID-19, and the American Rescue Act and the infrastructure bill. All these things have really given us a wonderful future. But yeah, you can't take the economy for granted. And Jamie Dimon is prominent. I don't know what to tell you other than we're all going to be working at it, and we don't want to take any of our gains for granted. And the last thing we want to do is go back to the era of Trump. I mean, these guys are, they practice political quackery. That's what they do. They try to scare people, find enemies everywhere, be so negative. I'm looking at Harris Walz as a very positive force. By the way, Tim Walz has the ideal credentials to be president himself.
All right, Governor, I got to get out. Just stay tuned. Don't go away. We're going to do closed credits and come back for more overtime. Are you game?
Sure.
What else you got to do, right? Go to these closed credits, come back at WKAR.org for more of our interesting conversation with the former governor. Please do.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.